Sir, this section is reserved for our elite frequent flyers. I need you to gather your belongings and move to the back of the aircraft right now. The words came out, smooth, rehearsed, like a script this man had recited 100 times before. Trevor Hayes, senior flight attendant on Meridian Airlines, Flight 81 stood in the aisle, with his chin lifted, and his smile stretched so tight it looked painful. He was staring down at the man in seat 2A, like he was staring at a stain on the carpet. The passenger, Marcus Webb, didn't even look up right away. When he did, his face was calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that unsettles people who are used to getting their way. I have a confirmed reservation for seat 2A, Marcus said. I paid for it. I'm not moving. Trevor's smile cracked at the edges. He leaned in, lowering his voice, like he was letting Marcus in on a secret. Sir, this is our premium cabin. I think there's been some kind of mix-up with your ticket. The word premium hung in the air like a slap. Around them, other business-class passengers glanced up, then quickly looked away. Sudden, fascinating interest in seatbelt buckles and phone screens. A woman 2 rows up whispered to her husband. A man across the aisle didn't even pretend not to stare. Marcus folded the newspaper on his lap, sloven and unhurried. There's no mix-up. Here's my boarding pass. He held it out. His eyes never left Trevor's face. Trevor barely glanced at it. I understand, sir, but we need this seat for one of our top-tier customers. We can absolutely accommodate you somewhere else on the plane. I'm not moving, Marcus repeated, quiet, but with a weight behind it that made the air in the cabin feel thinner. Trevor's professional mask slipped just a little further. Sir, I'd strongly suggest you cooperate. We have procedures for passengers who don't understand how this works. What Trevor Hayes did not know, could not have known, was that, in exactly the time it would take this flight to push back from the gate, he would not only fail to move this man from his seat, he would trigger the single biggest safety and discrimination scandal in the history of American commercial aviation. Because the man in 2A wasn't just another passenger with a nice boarding pass. He was the founder and chief executive of Webb Sterling Capital, the largest single shareholder of Meridian Airlines' parent company, and a man who had spent his entire life being underestimated by people just like Trevor Hayes. But for now, Marcus said nothing else. He just sat there quietly, watching Trevor make the worst mistake of his career. If you've ever walked into a room and felt someone decide who you were before you said a single word, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what happens on this flight doesn't just change one man's day. It grounds an entire airline and rewrites the rules for an entire industry. And if that sounds like something worth sticking around for, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because you will not want to miss where this goes. It was 8:50 on a Wednesday morning, Denver International Airport, Gate C-42. The business cabin of Flight 814 to Seattle gleamed with soft overhead lighting, the leather seats reclined and waiting, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the galley. Passengers in tailored blazers and expensive watches settled in, arranging laptops, claiming their space in this small, exclusive world 8,000 feet before it ever left the ground. Marcus Webb, 47, sat in 2A in a plain navy quarter zip and dark jeans. No logos, no jewelry beyond a simple steel watch that told time and nothing else. His hair was cropped close, touched with gray at the temples. He looked like a man who had nowhere important to be, which was, of course, exactly the point. There were no signet rings, no branded luggage tags, nothing to announce who he was. Just a man traveling quietly, whose stillness somehow commanded more attention than noise ever could. Trevor Hayes, 44, cut a sharp contrast. 18 years with Meridian, a uniform pressed to a knife's edge. A reputation among his colleagues for knowing exactly which passengers mattered before they even said a word. His eyes did the math on people. Watch brand, suit cut, luggage, posture, and right now his math wasn't adding up for the man in 2A, and it irritated him more than he could hide. 20 minutes earlier, Marcus had boarded without any fuss, blending into the stream of business travelers. His only bag was a plain black backpack. At the door, the greeting flight attendant's smile had dimmed just slightly when her eyes swept over his casual clothes. "Seat?" she'd asked, the usual welcome aboard noticeably absent. "2A," he said. She nodded, already turning to the man behind him. "Mr. Halloway. Wonderful to see you again. Your usual will be waiting after takeoff." Marcus found his own seat, stowed his own bag, and settled in, noting how flight attendants rushed to help other passengers with their luggage while walking straight past him. A drink cart came by and skipped his row entirely, despite eye contact. A crew member checking seatbelts asked to see his boarding pass a second time, something nobody else was asked to do. Small things. The kind of things people are trained to dismiss as coincidence. Marcus had stopped calling them coincidence a long time ago. He had boarded this exact flight on purpose. Webb Sterling Capital held a significant stake in Meridian's parent company, and Marcus made a habit, quietly, anonymously, of flying his own airlines the way an ordinary passenger would. Not the polished, camera-ready version reserved for known VIPs. The real one. Today's route had been flagged after a string of discrimination complaints from this specific crew had mysteriously vanished into the customer service system without a single follow-up. He opened his newspaper and settled in to watch. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to pretend not to notice one either. "Where is my seat?" I requested 2A specifically, like I always do. The voice cut through the cabin like a slammed door. Bradley Kingston, 53, stood in the aisle, filling it with his 6'3" frame and the kind of entitlement that didn't need volume to be loud. His charcoal suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Platinum cufflinks. A watch that caught the cabin light every time he moved his wrist, which he did often and pointedly. "Mr. Kingston, welcome aboard." Trevor's whole demeanor transformed, his voice warming instantly. "We're just sorting out a small seating matter. Your usual seat will be free in just a moment." Bradley's eyes swept the cabin and landed on Marcus. His expression went from irritation to confusion to something uglier in about 2 seconds flat. "This is my seat," he said, like a verdict, not a question. "According to my boarding pass," Marcus said evenly, "it's mine today." Bradley blinked, thrown. People didn't say no to Bradley Kingston, founder and CEO of Kingston Dynamics, a man whose company spent more with Meridian in a single quarter than most passengers spent in a lifetime. "There's obviously been a mistake," Bradley said, turning to Trevor, as if Marcus were a piece of furniture that had been misplaced. "I've had this exact seat every Wednesday morning flight to Seattle for 3 years. It's in my profile." "Absolutely, sir," Trevor said quickly. "We're resolving this right now." "By resolving," Marcus asked, "you mean you expect me to give up a seat I paid for?" Bradley's jaw tightened. He turned and really looked at Marcus for the first time. The plain clothes, the lack of any visible wealth, the calm that irritated him more than any argument could have. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I don't," Marcus said honestly, "but I do know I bought a ticket for this exact seat, and I intend to keep it." Bradley's face reddened. "I've had platinum status with this airline longer than you've probably owned a suit." A young woman in the row ahead visibly flinched at that. A man across the aisle suddenly found the safety card fascinating. "Mr. Kingston, please, let me offer you 3A. Trevor cut in, desperate. "Identical seat, extra legroom, and I'll personally make sure you have champagne service the entire flight." "That is not the point," Bradley snapped, voice rising. "My profile says 2A. Always. I shouldn't have to explain this." "And my boarding pass says 2A, Marcus said, still calm, though the tension in the cabin had thickened into something almost physical. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking the airline to honor the seat I already paid for." Bradley leaned down, voice dropping into something low and mean. Listen very carefully. I don't know who you think you are, but you are about to learn an extremely expensive lesson about how the world actually works. Marcus met his eyes without flinching. I'm listening. Please. Continue explaining how the world works. That was when Rachel Simmons, the cabin manager, arrived, 36, crisp uniform, the practiced neutrality of someone who mediated a dozen small wars a week. What seems to be the issue here? Trevor explained fast, tripping over his own words. Rachel's eyes swept the scene. Bradley's flushed anger, Marcus's stillness, the audience of passengers pretending not to watch. Mr. Webb, I do apologize for the inconvenience, she said. Then, turning to Bradley, her voice warmed noticeably. Mr. Kingston, we value your loyalty tremendously. I'm sure we can find a solution that works. There's no inconvenience on my end, Marcus said. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. Yes. I understand, Rachel said, smile fixed, but eyes cooling. We do have some flexibility for our most frequent travelers. Are you saying some reservations are worth less than others? Not at all. We simply have protocols that prioritize loyalty status when resolving conflicts. And where exactly is that written when someone buys a ticket? Rachel didn't have an answer for that. Bradley, out of patience, snapped, This is absurd. I shouldn't be standing here arguing about a seat with my name practically engraved on it. Mr. Kingston is a Diamond Tier member with over 4 million lifetime miles, Trevor added, as if that settled the matter for good. Impressive, Marcus said. I respect his loyalty to this airline. It still doesn't override a valid reservation. Rachel leaned toward Trevor and whispered something. Marcus caught only fragments of, not worth a scene. Find another way. If he posts this online, it's a nightmare. A young off-duty flight attendant, sitting a few rows back. Danielle Ferris, 28, watched all of this with a growing, uncomfortable knot in her stomach. She recognized exactly what was happening. The automatic warmth toward wealth. The automatic suspicion toward everyone else. Rachel tried again, tablet in hand. Mr. Webb, we can offer you a complimentary upgrade on your next 3 Meridian flights, 50,000 loyalty miles, and premium meal service wherever you sit today. That's generous, Marcus said, but this was never about compensation. This is about being treated the same as any other paying passenger. He gestured around the cabin. Would you ask anyone else here to give up their seat because someone else wanted it? Rachel hesitated, just long enough for the truth of the question to land. It's a unique situation, is it? Marcus asked. Or does it happen to people who don't look like they belong here, according to someone's private judgment? Bradley's patience snapped entirely. For God's sake, just take the miles and move. Some of us have real business waiting, and some of us have principles that aren't for sale, Marcus said, voice never rising. Rachel's tone hardened. Mr. Webb, this is your last chance to accept our offer before we're forced to take further measures. Such as? We have protocols for passengers who refuse to comply with crew instructions. I see, Marcus said slowly. So sitting quietly in my assigned seat is now considered non-compliance. Trevor had heard enough. He stepped back and lifted the crew phone to his ear. Security to the jet bridge. We have a situation in business class. Bradley checked his watch with visible satisfaction. Finally, some action. Through all of it, Marcus never raised his voice, never made a sudden movement, gave them nothing to justify what was about to happen. Instead, he calmly took out his phone and opened the voice recorder. I'd like to document this, he said quietly, since it appears I'm about to be removed from a flight for the crime of sitting in my own seat. Recording crew members isn't allowed, Trevor said sharply. I read your policies before I booked, Marcus replied. There's no rule against recording my own experience in a public cabin. I'm not filming your procedures, I'm documenting mine. For just a second, Trevor didn't have a comeback. Security arrived within minutes. Frank Delgado, head of airport security, tall and unreadable, flanked by 2 officers. He surveyed the scene with practiced detachment. What's the situation? Trevor gestured at Marcus. This passenger is refusing crew instructions on a seating matter. Frank turned to Marcus. Sir, the crew has authority over seating. If they've asked you to move, I need you to comply. With respect, that's not accurate, Marcus said. Crews can reassign seats for safety or balance reasons. Neither applies here. I have a valid reservation. I'm being asked to move because another passenger wants my seat and has status. That's not a safety issue. That's a preference. Frank glanced at Rachel for confirmation. She hesitated. It's a bit more complex. Mr. Kingston has a seating preference noted in his profile. I see, Frank said slowly, and something in his face shifted. The quiet recognition that he was being asked to enforce a private courtesy, not an actual rule. That's when Danielle Ferris stood up. Excuse me, she said, walking over, her off-duty crew ID still clipped to her lanyard. I think we're overlooking something important. Company policy clearly states that confirmed seat assignments can only be changed for operational safety reasons. Passenger status preference isn't listed anywhere as a valid reason for involuntary reassignment. This isn't your flight, Danielle, Trevor snapped. Sit down. Is that accurate? Frank asked, ignoring Trevor entirely. Because I can't remove a passenger who isn't breaking any actual rule. The cabin had gone quiet in that particular way. That means everyone is now watching, several phones already raised and recording. Marcus spoke again, calm as ever. I have no interest in delaying this flight. I simply want the same respect given to every other passenger who paid for a seat on this aircraft. Frank exhaled. Let me make a call. While Frank stepped away, Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he produced a black card, the highest invitation-only tier in Meridian's loyalty program. Since status seems to be the actual issue here, he said quietly, handing it to Rachel. I've been flying this airline for over 16 years. That represents roughly 9 million miles. Rachel stared at the card, then at Marcus, then back at the card, her face draining of color. Trevor leaned over to look and went pale himself. You didn't present this at boarding, Rachel said, voice unsteady. No, Marcus agreed. Because I shouldn't have needed to. Every passenger deserves respect regardless of status or appearance. Bradley, catching sight of the card, faltered for the first time all morning. Wait, your black tier? Then why are you making such a fuss? You understand exactly how this works. I understand precisely how this works, Marcus said. That's exactly why I'm not moving. That's when Marcus glanced out the window and went still. A thin, dark line was creeping along the wing near the engine housing, catching the morning light with an oily sheen. He pressed the call button. Trevor answered with visible reluctance. Yes? There's fluid leaking near the left engine housing, Marcus said, pointing. You might want maintenance to look at that before takeoff. Trevor barely glanced out the window. That's just condensation, sir. Nothing to worry about. I've flown 9 million miles, Mr. Hayes. That is not condensation. The color and thickness say hydraulic fluid. I'll make a note of it, Trevor said, already walking away. Clearly filing this under passenger being difficult. Round 2. 15 minutes later, the streak had grown from a thin line into a visible patch of amber fluid. Marcus pressed the call button again. This time Rachel answered, and when she leaned over to look, her professional composure actually cracked. I'll have the captain informed, she said, all warmth gone from her voice, replaced by something closer to alarm. Captain's voice came over the intercom minutes later, calm and measured, announcing a precautionary maintenance check. Passengers groaned. Bradley, now reseated up front, shot Marcus a suspicious glare, clearly assuming this was some kind of retaliation for the seat dispute. 20 minutes after that, a senior mechanic named Walter Briggs boarded and made his way straight to Marcus's row. Sir, could you show me exactly what you saw? Marcus pointed to the streak, now unmistakable. Started as a thin line about 40 minutes ago. Color and viscosity suggest hydraulic fluid. possibly from the aileron control system, based on the location. Walter's eyebrows went up. He studied it, then turned pale. You're right. That's hydraulic fluid, and it should not be there. He turned to Rachel. We need to deplane immediately and swap aircraft. This is a Class 2 fluid leak, affecting critical control surfaces. Rachel's composure finally shattered. Is it serious? Serious enough that this plane is not flying today, Walter said flatly. If this had gone unnoticed until cruising altitude, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A chill went through Marcus that had nothing to do with cabin temperature. His refusal to move hadn't just been about dignity. It had potentially kept every single person on this aircraft alive. The announcement came minutes later. All passengers would need to deplane, while a replacement aircraft was arranged. Estimated delay: at least 2 hours. Gerald Whitfield, Meridian's Vice President of Customer Experience, happened to be on this exact flight and hurried to the front, alerted by his own team. Mr. Webb, he said, extending a hand, professional smile firmly back in place. I understand there's been some confusion. Let me help make this right. Mr. Whitfield, Marcus said, shaking his hand but staying seated. I appreciate the gesture. But I'm concerned about what's already happened here. Rachel briefed him quietly, showing him the black card, her face still ashen. Gerald turned back to Marcus with a slightly different tone now. Mr. Webb, please understand, we deeply value all our customers, especially our top-tier members. We'll make this right immediately. That's exactly my concern, Marcus said. The implication that this would be handled differently if I weren't a top-tier member. Gerald's smile faltered. We have protocols for our most valued partners, and those protocols include displacing other passengers from seats they already paid for. Gerald had no good answer for that either. Let me be clear, Marcus continued, voice still calm but carrying real weight now. I don't want special treatment because of a card in my wallet. I want equal treatment for every passenger, regardless of status or appearance. The fact that your staff was fully prepared to physically remove me until they saw this card is deeply troubling. Gerald shifted, caught between corporate script and the increasingly public nature of the moment. Dozens of phones recording, an audience of witnesses. A viral disaster already forming in real time. Andre and Thomas found a quiet corner of the terminal. Mr. Webb, first, let me apologize sincerely, Gerald began. Isn't this exactly representative of how your crew treats passengers based on appearance rather than actual status? Marcus asked quietly. We have strict non-discrimination policies, Gerald said. Policies on paper mean nothing when culture contradicts them, Marcus replied. He told him about an incident 20 years earlier, flying to his own mother's funeral, exhausted after days without sleep, and being stopped at the gate because a gate agent decided a young black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly hold a legitimate first-class ticket. Made to step aside, made to wait, his seat given away before he ever boarded, arriving late, humiliated, to bury his mother. I promised myself that day, Marcus said, that if I ever had the power to change this, I would. He then told Gerald who he really was. Founder and CEO of Webb Sterling Capital. $160 billion in assets under management and the single largest shareholder in Meridian's parent company, holding 37% of outstanding shares. Gerald went white. I had no idea. That was the point, Marcus said. I travel anonymously, so I experience this airline the way an ordinary passenger does. Not the version you show to people you recognize. He opened a folder on his tablet. 6 months of documented incidents from an anonymous audit program, filed through proper channels, quietly buried by customer service every single time. This isn't an isolated incident, Mr. Whitfield. It's a pattern, and as we just saw, it's not only a dignity problem, it's a safety problem. My concern about that leak was dismissed within seconds, for the exact same reason I was asked to give up my seat. By this point, news had already started moving. Renee Carter, Marcus's chief of staff, activated the response protocol back at Webb Sterling's headquarters in Denver, a small crisis team assembling around live social feeds, already showing 3 separate videos of the confrontation. At Meridian's own headquarters, CEO Charles Preston was in the middle of a board meeting when an assistant rushed in with a tablet showing the videos going viral and the growing realization of exactly who the passenger in seat 2A actually was. "Get Whitfield on the line," Charles said, voice tight. "Now." Within minutes he learned the scope of it. Months of documented discrimination, a dismissed safety concern that had turned out to be catastrophically real, and a shareholder large enough to force out the entire leadership team if he wanted to. "Ground the fleet," Charles said. "All of it. Immediate safety inspections." "All of it?" Gerald asked, stunned. "All of it," Charles confirmed. "If bias caused us to dismiss one critical safety concern today, I am not betting the rest of our fleet on it not happening again." Back at the gate, things had gotten uglier. Security officers approached Marcus and Gerald, led by a grim-faced Trevor. "We've received a report that a passenger made false safety claims to disrupt operations," an officer said. Gerald stared at him. "That's completely false. Maintenance confirmed a real, serious hydraulic leak." Trevor pushed forward anyway, desperation written across his face. "He only made the claim after the seating dispute. It's retaliatory." Marcus stayed composed. "Officer, your own senior mechanic classified this as a Class 2 fluid leak, affecting critical flight controls. That's a documented fact, not a passenger's opinion." The officer hesitated, caught between 2 conflicting stories. That's when a passenger from the flight, Angela Torres, 34, who had watched the entire confrontation from a nearby row, pushed forward. "Are you seriously trying to remove the man who may have just saved everyone's life?" she demanded, loud enough that heads turned across the gate area. "I watched your staff humiliate him because he didn't look rich enough for that seat. Then he spotted a leak your own crew tried to brush off. And now you want to blame him?" Phones went up all around. An elderly man in a nearby seat leaned forward. "Young man, I've flown for 50 years. I've seen this happen more times than I can count. Thank you for standing your ground." Trevor's face drained of color as the crowd turned, phones raised, the story shifting in real time from an internal matter into a public reckoning. Gerald stepped in front of the security officers. "There's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Webb isn't just a passenger. He is a controlling shareholder of this airline's parent company, and he just identified a serious safety threat. There will be no further security involvement here." Trevor's mouth opened, then closed. "Shareholder," he repeated weakly. Marcus stood slowly, and the whole gate area seemed to hold its breath. "My name is Marcus Webb," he said, voice clear, without ever needing to be raised. "I'm the founder and CEO of Webb Sterling Capital. My firm owns 37% of the company that owns this airline. I sit on the board." A ripple went through the crowd. Trevor froze completely, the blood gone from his face. Bradley, hovering near the desk, began quietly edging toward the exit, suddenly desperate to disappear. "I boarded this flight as myself," Marcus continued. "Not as an investor, not as a board member, as a regular passenger who paid for his seat. And in doing exactly that, I found out precisely how this airline treats people when it doesn't recognize a name or value how someone looks." He turned slightly toward Trevor. "Mr. Hayes, your actions today weren't really about you, personally. You're the product of a culture that rewards certain assumptions and punishes others. That doesn't excuse it, but it's bigger than you." Then he turned toward the reporters already gathering, drawn by the trending videos. "This isn't about a seat," he said. "It's about a system that decides whose concerns matter based on how they look, not what they say. And today, that system nearly cost every person on this aircraft their life." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then real. 3 hours later, Charles Preston arrived personally. meeting Marcus in a private conference room at the airport, flanked by Gerald and a shaken legal team. "Mr. Webb," Charles said, extending his hand. "I understand we have serious issues to discuss." "We do," Marcus said, "far more than a seat assignment." Renee Carter laid out 6 months of documented patterns, passengers of color, and casually dressed travelers, consistently receiving worse treatment, delayed responses, and, most damning of all, 3 prior incidents where legitimate safety concerns had been dismissed before maintenance eventually confirmed them. "This isn't a training problem," Marcus said. "It's a structural one. I'm proposing the Webb Standard, a full reboot of how this airline treats every passenger and evaluates every safety report, regardless of who it comes from." He gave them 24 hours to accept it in full, or Webb Sterling would call for an immediate board vote to replace leadership. Charles didn't hesitate long. "We accept, fully, no modifications." The fallout arrived fast and hard. Trevor Hayes was placed on immediate leave, his badge confiscated, escorted out past rows of coworkers who watched in silence, some sympathetic, most simply relieved that accountability had finally shown up. Bradley Kingston's public meltdown had already gone viral by evening, his exact words replayed millions of times, dissected on every platform. By the next morning, Kingston Dynamics stock had dropped. 2 major clients had suspended their contracts, and the board was in emergency session. Within a week, Bradley was forced to resign. His public statement, when it finally came, wasn't the usual hollow apology. Standing in front of cameras, visibly shaken, he said, "I spent my entire career assuming certain privileges were owed to me. That belief made me treat another human being like an obstacle. That was wrong, and I have no excuse for it." Months later, at an aviation safety summit, Bradley showed up uninvited and walked to the microphone during the open Q&A. "I'm not a CEO anymore," he said, voice smaller than anyone remembered it. "I'm here as someone who was part of the exact problem this industry is trying to fix. What I did that day wasn't just rude. It was dangerous. My demand that staff prioritize my comfort over an actual boarding pass is exactly the kind of thinking that lets real safety concerns get ignored." He looked out into the crowd until he found Marcus. "I'm working with 3 airlines now, helping them identify the same blind spots I created for years, without ever noticing them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't supposed to be. But it was the truth, finally, spoken out loud." Gerald Whitfield was suspended 30 days, then given a choice: resign or return to lead the reform program he had hesitated to stop in the first place. He chose to stay and rebuild. Danielle Ferris, the young off-duty attendant who had spoken up when it cost her something to do it, was promoted to head Meridian's newly created Customer Equity Task Force. "Why her?" someone asked Marcus later. "She was the only person in that cabin who looked uncomfortable with what was happening," Marcus said. "That discomfort is the first requirement for real change." Danielle later told Marcus privately why she'd risked her job that day. "My brother was pulled off a flight last year," she said quietly. "He was in his own seat. Nobody even checked his boarding pass. They just assumed he didn't belong there. He missed my mother's surgery because of it. I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch it happen to someone else." Walter Briggs, the mechanic, was appointed to head a new technical safety initiative built around a single rule. Every reported concern enters the same validation queue, evaluated purely on its merits, regardless of who reported it. The old system prioritized who reported an issue, Walter explained during a hearing. The new one prioritizes what the issue actually is. That single change closes a gap that could have killed people. 2 months later, industry leaders gathered in Washington for an emergency summit that would have been unthinkable before Flight 814. The FAA administrator opened with blunt honesty. "What happened on that aircraft forced a conversation the entire industry has avoided for decades. Discrimination and safety are not separate issues. They are the same issue." 5 other major carriers adopted versions of the Webb standard within the year. Congress held hearings. Marcus testified plainly. This was never about one flight or one company. It's about what happens when we build systems that decide whose voice counts before they've even spoken. 1 year later, almost to the day, Marcus boarded Flight 81 again. Same route, same airline, deliberately booked in economy this time, dressed exactly as plainly as before. No entourage, no announcement. At the gate, an unexpected figure was waiting, not in uniform, dressed in ordinary clothes, visibly nervous. "Mr. Webb," Trevor Hayes said, "I heard you might be on this flight. I wanted to talk to you if you're willing." Marcus studied him, then nodded. "I train new hires now," Trevor said, "on bias, on what I did wrong and why I never even thought of it as bias at the time. I just called it doing my job." He took a breath. "I want to apologize. Not because I have to, because I was wrong. The system was wrong, but I was the one who enforced it. I looked at you and made a judgment based on absolutely nothing." "I appreciate that," Marcus said after a moment. This was never about blaming one person. It was about fixing the pattern that produced that person. It sounds like you're trying to do exactly that. "I share what I did," Trevor said, not as an outside expert lecturing about bias, as someone who lived it and enforced it for 18 years without ever questioning it. It seems to land differently that way. Marcus nodded slowly. That's how real change starts. Not with pretending it never happened, with admitting exactly what did. On the flight, Marcus sat beside Angela Torres, the passenger who had spoken up for him in the terminal that day. "I didn't expect to see you in economy," she said, smiling, "especially on this route again." "I fly the way I always have," Marcus said. "Sometimes business, sometimes economy." It was never about which cabin deserves better service. It's about every passenger deserving the same respect, no matter where they're sitting. Midway through the flight, a passenger near the back reported a strange sound near the wing. Instead of dismissing it, the flight attendant thanked him immediately, documented it, and radioed the cockpit. The captain came back personally to explain what it was. No irritation. No hierarchy of whose concerns got taken seriously. Just the same procedure applied to everyone. When they landed in Seattle, Danielle was waiting at the gate, now director of the Customer Equity Task Force. "How was the flight?" she asked. "Different," Marcus said. "Not perfect, but different in the way that matters. Response time equity is at 91% across all demographics now," Danielle reported. Safety concern reporting is up 32%, and every single one gets the same technical validation, no exceptions. And the crew? Resistant at first. "Now most of them say it's actually easier," she said. "There's no more guessing who deserves the good version of service. There's just one version, for everyone." At an aviation safety conference later that year, a young black pilot in a regional uniform approached Marcus after his panel. "I've been in this industry 8 years," she said. "For the first time, I'm seeing real change, not just words." It took someone refusing to move from seat 2A to make the rest of us believe we could stand our ground, too. "The changes aren't mine," Marcus told her. "They're happening because people like you are living them out every single day, usually without anyone noticing. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be, this story was for you. And if you've never felt that, remember, every single day gives you a chance to either reinforce that feeling in someone else or take it apart. What seat are you refusing to give up in your own life? What standard are you setting that might outlast you long after you're gone?" Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because when we choose dignity over anger and principle over ego, we create something that ripples out far beyond one flight, one airline, or one single moment. Something that can change an entire industry's understanding of who actually deserves to be heard.